Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered if your jigging is actually scaring fish away instead of attracting them? I know it sounds crazy. But today we're talking about why your jigging game, the one you've perfected for years, might look completely unnatural and terrifying to the fish you're trying to catch. I'm going to show you the one simple reason this happens and how a tiny change in your approach can make all the difference between a full, live well and going home empty-handed. And here's a hint, it has nothing to do with your lure color, your line, or the spot you're fishing. It's something much more fundamental. So here's a question to get you started, and I want you to answer it in the comments right now. Do you think a faster, more aggressive jigging motion is always better for triggering a strike? I have a feeling you might change your mind by the end of this video. Look, we all learn to jig a certain way. Maybe your dad taught you on a frozen lake, or you watched a fishing show on a Saturday morning years ago. The lesson was always the same: a sharp lift, a quick drop. Then you repeat it. Over and over, it becomes pure muscle memory, something you don't even think about anymore. The common wisdom is that this sharp, aggressive action gets their attention. It's supposed to look like a fleeing baitfish, making a lot of commotion to trigger that predatory reaction strike. And let's be fair, on some days, when the fish are fired up and competing for food, it absolutely works. But what happens on those other days? The tough days when the water is clear or the fishing pressure is high. That's when that same aggressive, predictable motion becomes a warning signal, not a dinner bell. We get so focused on creating an action that we completely forget to think about the reaction of the fish we're targeting. We're doing the same thing for years because it feels right to us, not because it looks right to them. So let's get right to the heart of the problem. The single biggest reason your jigging looks unnatural is because you, as a human, are a creature of rhythm and habit. Think about how you do anything repetitively. When you tap your foot to music, you keep a steady beat. When you walk down a street, your steps are even and spaced. We are biologically programmed for consistency. So when you pick up a fishing rod and start jigging, your brain and your muscles automatically fall into a predictable pattern. Lift, drop, lift, drop. It's a perfect 1-2, 1-2 beat. You might change the speed, making it faster or slower, but the rhythm itself remains unnervingly constant. And while that consistency might feel right and productive to you, to a fish that has spent its entire life in a world of chaotic, unpredictable movement, your perfect rhythm is the loudest, most unnatural alarm bell imaginable. It screams fake. It's the equivalent of a perfectly timed metronome in the middle of a wild forest. It just doesn't belong, and every survival instinct in a fish's brain tells it to stay far, far away. To really understand this, let's look at it from the fish's perspective. Imagine you're a big walleye suspended off a deep weed edge. You're conserving energy, just waiting for an easy meal to come by. Most of the things you see move in a very specific way. A small perch darts a few feet, then stops dead, then maybe flutters down a little. A minnow, if it's injured, will struggle, then pause, then sink erratically. Nothing in its world moves with the perfect mechanical up and down motion of a piston. So when your jig enters its field of vision doing that same exact 2-foot lift and 2-foot drop every 2 seconds, it doesn't register as food. It registers as something completely alien, something manufactured. Fish are wired for millions of years of evolution to detect things that are wrong or out of place. It's how they avoid danger and find real food. Your perfect rhythmic jigging is a giant flashing sign that says danger, not food. It's predictable, and in nature, predictability often means a trap. This brings us to the first major mistake that stems from this rhythmic tendency, the complete lack of a meaningful pause. So many anglers are terrified of the pause. They think if the lure isn't moving, it's not working. They jig up, let it fall, and the second it hits the bottom or the end of the fall, they're ripping it up again. They are so focused on imparting action that they don't give the fish a chance to actually bite. But here's the truth that will change your fishing forever. At least 9 out of 10 bites on a jig happen during the pause. It happens when the jig is sitting still on the bottom, or when it's suspended motionless in the water column after the fall. That moment of stillness is what signals vulnerability. It's the moment the prey has given up or is unaware. It's the absolute prime time for a predator to strike because it's a guaranteed meal with minimal effort. If you are constantly moving your lure, you are robbing the fish of that perfect opportunity to commit. Let's break down why that pause is so critical. Think about a real-world predator like a cat hunting a mouse. The cat doesn't pounce when the mouse is scurrying at full speed. It waits, it stalks. It waits for the exact moment the mouse stops to sniff the air or pauses for a split second. That's the trigger. Fish are no different. Your aggressive jigging might get their attention and draw them in to investigate, but it's the pause that seals the deal. When your jig suddenly stops moving and just hangs there or rests on the bottom, it's telling the fish a story. It's saying, I'm exhausted or I'm injured and I can't move anymore. This is the moment a curious follower turns into a committed biter. A continuous, non-stop jigging motion communicates strength and awareness. A pause communicates weakness and an easy meal. So you have to build that into your retrieve. Not just a half-second pause, but a real, deliberate, count to 5, sometimes even count to 10 pause. You have to give them that window to attack. Now let's talk about the second major mistake, the way your jig falls. Most anglers think they control the fall. They lift the rod tip, and then they lower the rod tip at a controlled speed, trying to maintain contact with the jig the entire time. This is what we call a controlled fall or a tight line fall. The problem is it looks completely unnatural. A dying baitfish does not fall like an elevator. It flutters, it spins, it glides, it moves from side to side. It falls on what we call slack line. By keeping your line tight on the fall, you are pulling the jig straight down. You are killing all of the lure's built-in, natural-looking action. You've essentially turned a beautifully designed lure that's meant to spiral and flutter into a simple lead weight going straight to the bottom. It's another example of that robotic, predictable movement that fish are so good at detecting. They see that perfectly vertical drop and their internal alarm bells go off again. So how do you fix this unnatural fall? It's simple, but it feels wrong at first. You need to introduce slack. After you lift your jig off the bottom, don't follow it down with your rod tip. Instead, just drop your rod tip quickly, creating a small bow or a bit of slack in your line. This frees the jig to do what it was designed to do. It allows it to glide, to circle, to flutter, to kick out to the side. It is now falling based on its own hydrodynamics, not because you are pulling it down. This is when you have to become a line watcher. You're not going to feel the bite on a slack line. You are going to see it. You watch where your line enters the water. If it suddenly jumps, twitches, or starts moving sideways when it should be sinking, a fish has it. You have to reel down fast and set the hook. This slack line fall is perhaps the single most important technique for making a jig look alive and vulnerable, and it's something very few anglers actually master. Here's another way to think about it that might help. Your job is not to pull the lure up and then guide it back down. Your job is simply to lift the lure off the bottom and then let it die. That's it. The lift is the struggle, the moment of panic. The slack line fall is the part where it gives up and becomes an easy target. The entire story you are telling the fish is struggle, then die. Not go up, then go down. Imagine a small minnow spooked by a predator. It would dart upwards frantically and then, exhausted, it would just give up and flutter back down, catching the current. It wouldn't swim powerfully back to the exact spot it started from. By controlling the fall on a tight line, you are effectively making the lure swim back down, which communicates strength, not weakness. So from now on, change your mindset, pop it up, and then let it die. Your hookup rate on the fall will increase dramatically. The third major mistake is closely related to the first one about rhythm. It's the height and intensity of the lift. So many of us get into this groove where we lift the rod tip the exact same distance every single time. Maybe it's a 1-foot hop, maybe it's a 3-foot rip, but whatever it is, we repeat it with robotic precision. Again, this is not how nature works. Think about a crayfish scooting along the bottom. It might make a tiny little hop of just a few inches. Then, if it gets scared, it might shoot up 3 feet off the bottom in a panic. It doesn't do the same exact hop every single time. By using the same lift over and over, you're creating a pattern that is easily recognizable as fake. A fish might see it once and be curious, but after seeing the same exact mechanical hop 3, 4, or 5 times, its brain registers it as an inanimate, non-food object. It loses all interest because the movement is too perfect and too predictable. The solution here is to become intentionally unpredictable. You have to consciously break your own rhythm. On one lift, just barely pop the jig off the bottom by a few inches, just a tiny little twitch to get the rattles to click or the skirt to flare. On the next lift, sweep the rod up a full 3 feet, making the jig rocket towards the surface. Then let it fall back on a slack line. The next time, just drag it along the bottom for a foot without lifting it at all. Then follow that with 2 quick short pops. The goal is to make sure that no 2 movements are exactly the same. This constant variation is what mimics a real, living creature that is reacting to its environment. It's unpredictable. The fish doesn't know what the jig is going to do next. And that uncertainty is what keeps it interested and triggers it to strike before the potential meal gets away. Be random, be chaotic, be anything but rhythmic. Let's talk about a big part of the equation here, your rod and line. A lot of anglers, especially those new to jigging, use a rod that is too stiff, what we call a broomstick. They think they need this incredible stiffness to feel the bite. The problem is, a super stiff rod with a no-stretch braided line transmits every single tiny, jerky movement from your hand directly to the lure. It makes it almost impossible to be subtle. It exaggerates the mechanical nature of your jigging. You think you're making a small pop with your wrist, but that translates into a violent, unnatural jerk of the lure down below. A rod with a slightly softer tip, a fast or extra-fast action, can act as a shock absorber. It helps to smooth out your inputs and allows for a more fluid, natural presentation. It can make even an average jigging cadence look 10 times more lifelike. It's not about feeling the thump of the bite, it's about presenting the lure in a way that generates the bite in the first place. This brings up a critical point about what you're trying to feel. Most anglers say they are trying to feel the jig. They want to feel it hit the bottom, feel it tick off of rocks and feel the fish bite. But I'm going to suggest a shift in focus. Stop trying to feel the jig and start trying to feel your line, or more accurately, the absence of feeling. The best jig fishermen I know are masters of detecting changes in line tension. When a fish like a walleye or crappie inhales a jig, especially on the fall, you often don't feel a big thump. The lure just suddenly feels weightless, or the line goes slack when it should be tight. If you are only waiting for that hard tap, you are missing half, if not more, of your bites. This is another reason that slack line fall is so effective. You're not trying to feel anything, you're watching the line for any sign of unnatural movement. The bite becomes a visual cue, not a tactile one. This is a higher level of jigging, and it's what separates the pros from the amateurs. I remember a day ice fishing years ago that perfectly illustrates this. I was on a hot community spot shoulder to shoulder with maybe 20 other guys. I was getting nothing. I was doing my usual aggressive jigging, trying to call fish in. A few feet away from me was an old-timer, probably in his late 70s. He was pulling in perch and walleye one after another. I was getting frustrated, so I started watching him closely. And I realized his rod tip was barely moving. It looked like he wasn't even doing anything. He would lift it slowly, maybe 6 inches, and then just hold it there for a long, long time, maybe 30 seconds. Then he'd let it fall and again, just hold it. There were no sharp snaps, no violent rips. It was the most subtle, boring-looking presentation I had ever seen. But it was absolutely deadly because he wasn't trying to entertain himself with a lot of action. He was perfectly imitating a small, dying baitfish with very subtle, almost imperceptible movements. I finally got up the nerve to ask him what he was doing. He just chuckled and said, "Son, you're working way too hard. The lure is supposed to do the work, not you." And that one sentence completely changed my approach to jigging. He explained that his only job was to get the lure to the right depth. After that, he was just adding tiny little quivers and shakes. He called it nervous energy. He wasn't trying to make the jig jump. He was trying to make it look like it was alive, but terrified and trying to hold still. He would just barely tighten the line and use the smallest trembles of his hand to make the jig vibrate in place. He understood that in cold water, or when fish are pressured, less is almost always more. His presentation was natural, subtle, and full of long, enticing pauses. Meanwhile, I was down there scaring every fish in a 10-foot radius with my robotic, herky-jerky movements. It was a lesson I have never forgotten. This leads us to the fourth major mistake: ignoring what your specific lure is designed to do. We buy a jig, tie it on, and then force our own preferred jigging cadence onto it, regardless of its shape, size, or material. But a lead jig falls very differently than a tungsten jig of the same weight. A slender spoon is designed to flutter on the fall, while a round jig head is designed to fall straight and fast. Adding a plastic trailer completely changes the fall rate and action. A big, bulky creature bait will spiral and glide, while a simple minnow profile plastic will just drift down. You have to work with the lure, not against it. If you have a lure designed for a slow, gliding fall, but you're ripping it up and down on a tight line, you are completely defeating the purpose of its design. You paid for that built-in action, so you have to let it work its magic by giving it the slack it needs. Here is a piece of homework for you that will make you a better angler overnight. The next time you go fishing, before you even make a cast, go to a clear, shallow spot near the shore. Or if you're at home, you can even use a bucket of water or a swimming pool, tie on the jig you plan to use, and just drop it in the water in front of you. Watch it. See what it does on its own. Does it spiral? Does it glide forward? Does it rock back and forth? How fast does it fall? Now try giving it a short pop. See how it reacts. See how the plastic trailer moves. Your goal is to see what the lure's natural action is, and then your jigging cadence should be designed to maximize that action, not fight it. You might discover that the jig you've been ripping aggressively actually looks best with just a slow lift and a long slackline fall. This simple observation is far more valuable than any secret tip you'll ever hear. Let's talk about the sound and vibration component. When you are too rhythmic and aggressive, you are creating a very specific, monotonous sound signature in the water. Thump, thump, thump. It's a consistent vibration that, like the visual movement, can signal something unnatural. A real baitfish makes erratic sounds, a short burst of tail, kicks, then silence, a click as it hits a rock, then silence. It's not a steady beat. Fish have a lateral line that is incredibly sensitive to these vibrations. It's one of their primary ways of sensing their environment. When they detect a steady, repeating pulse, it can put them on edge. It can be perceived as a threat. By varying your cadence, using pauses, and mixing up your retrieve, you are also varying the sound signature of your lure, making it sound more like a natural, living thing and less like a piece of machinery. Don't just think about how your jig looks. Think about how it sounds. Another subtle mistake is what I call over-jigging when a fish is on the sonar. We've all done it. You're ice fishing or vertical jigging in a boat. You see a big red mark appear on your fish finder and move towards your lure. Your heart starts pounding. Your immediate instinct is to start jigging more aggressively to get him to bite. You start popping it faster and faster, thinking you need to trigger a reaction. But more often than not, what you see is the fish move in, pause, and then slowly drift away. What you did was panic, and your panic was transferred through the rod to the lure. The lure went from a subtle, enticing presentation to a frantic, unnatural-looking spasm. You essentially spooked the fish at the moment of truth. The correct response when you see a fish approaching is often to do the opposite. Slow down or even stop jigging completely. Let it hang. Quiver it. Make it look like an easy, terrified meal. Don't scare it away with panic. This also applies to your body position and how you hold the rod. Many anglers are tense. They have a death grip on the rod, their arm is stiff, and their movements come from their whole arm and shoulder. This makes it very difficult to be subtle and natural. The best jig fishermen are relaxed. Their grip is light. The movements come from the wrist and fingertips, not the arm. This allows for those small, nuanced twitches and quivers that look so much more realistic. Try to think of the rod as a conductor's baton, not a hammer. You are trying to finesse the lure, to coax it into looking alive. If you are tense and rigid, your lure will look tense and rigid. If you are relaxed and fluid, your lure will look relaxed and fluid. It's a direct transfer of energy and intention, and the fish can absolutely tell the difference between a tense, mechanical presentation and a relaxed, natural one. Let's bring this all back to the environment. The right cadence is not universal. It changes with the conditions. On a windy day with choppy water, you might need a more aggressive jigging style just to get the lure noticed and to maintain some semblance of contact with it. The surface chop is already creating a lot of chaos, so a more pronounced action can be effective. But on a calm, bluebird sky day with crystal clear water, that same aggressive jigging will stand out like a sore thumb. On those days, subtlety is king. The smallest twitches, the longest pauses, and the most natural fall you can manage will be what gets you bit. You have to adapt your cadence, not just to the fish's mood, but to the overall environment. Stop thinking there is one magic cadence. The magic is in the ability to adapt and give the fish what looks most natural in that specific moment. So, to put it all together in one final thought for this section, your goal is to be perfectly imperfect. You need to fight every natural instinct you have for rhythm and consistency. Think about the story you are telling. Is it the story of a machine or the story of a living creature? Your presentation should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The lift is the panic. The fall is the surrender. The pause is the moment of vulnerability. Mix up the intensity of the panic. Vary the duration of the surrender, and most importantly, extend the moment of vulnerability. It's in these imperfections, these pauses, these chaotic and unpredictable movements that your jig stops being a piece of lead and paint and transforms into a living, breathing meal that no predator can resist. Break the rhythm and you will start getting more bites. It really is that simple. So, the big takeaway from all of this is pretty clear. Stop being a robot. Your predictable, rhythmic, perfectly consistent jigging motion is a dead giveaway to the fish that you're not a real meal. It's the opposite of everything they are programmed to eat. The real triggers are the imperfections. It's the long pauses, the varied heights of your lifts, the chaotic and unpredictable nature of your cadence, and especially that natural, fluttering fall on a slack line. The real aha moment, the turning point, is when you stop thinking about jigging and start thinking about imitating. You are not just moving a lure up and down, you are puppeteering a small, dying creature. That is the entire mindset shift. When you adopt that mentality, everything else we talked about starts to make perfect sense. This changes your entire approach to fishing. You'll find yourself watching your line more and your rod tip less. You'll start to feel confident during those long, seemingly boring pauses because you'll know that's when the magic is about to happen. You're no longer just hoping for a bite. You're actively creating the perfect scenario for an attack. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this one. If this just blew your mind a little bit and made you rethink your technique, do me a favor and hit that like button. And for more tips that challenge the old, deeper ways of fishing, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Now, I have one last question for you, and I really want to see this discussion in the comments. What's the one golden rule of jigging you grew up with that you're now starting to question after watching this?